you're ready. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 71 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on November 29th, 2022, we are commencing the committee's study on Canada's clean energy plans in the context of the North American energy transformation. We have a number of departmental officials today to kick us off, and I'd like to welcome you. We'll get into the introductions shortly. I'd also like to welcome all the members, staff, and the team, including our new clerk, Patrick, and Stephanie, who's going to be supporting through a transition. And welcome to our analysts and everybody else who makes this, including our interpreters, who are, there they are, for all of their support. I hope everybody had a great summer. Before we get started, Mr. Angus, you've motioned something, so I'll turn the floor over to you briefly, and then we'll get into our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm extremely pleased to be back and see all my colleagues here, and I hope you all had a safe summer. We certainly were deeply affected by the burning in the far north, communities that were forced into evacuation. We saw fires right across North America, children who couldn't go out and play. Coming into Ottawa in the summer, it was out of a scene of a nightmare. So I think that I raise this because I think it's really important that we get our committee focused on this. To that end, Mr. Chair, I have brought forward a motion asking Mr. Kruger, the CEO of Suncor, to come and testify. I was very surprised by his comments that the urgent issue for Suncor was to make as much money as possible. This is a company that's made $70 billion in profits in 2 years. That we've seen these companies are putting the brakes on transition spending with no new investment in reducing emissions, and yet are regularly coming to Ottawa to look for us, the Canadian taxpayer, to give money to deal with these costs. So I have the motion. We could debate it now, or I could debate it at the end, but I think it's really important that we invite Mr. Kruger to come forward to explain whether or not Suncor is going to be a good corporate citizen at a time when we need all hands on deck to deal with the urgency of a burning planet.
Okay, well, your motion was put on notice in advance, so we do have our departmental officials here. I would like to get to them sooner than later. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Bruce, and I'll go to you first.
I support Mr. Angus's motion. I support Mr. Angus's motion. I think it would be good to hear actually from the CEOs of all of those related companies on this point that he has raised. I think that he is absolutely correct. We have seen a summer of wildfires, and it's important that the oil and gas sector, which is our largest emitting sector in the country, come and talk to us about what meaningful action they're taking to decarbonize and to reach net zero by 2050. So I support this motion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stubbs.
Thanks, Chair. Nice to be back with you all. Thanks, Charlie, for your motion. I just wonder if we could have a discussion either now or later on where you see this fitting in, because I think we do have an agreement to do the electricity intertie study after the 7 meetings on this IRA study. In general, we support the concept of Canadian energy company executives coming to committee to inform members of this committee who sometimes seem woefully uninformed about the scope and scale of innovation investments, of technology, of the ways that energy companies, particularly Suncor, have been driving the development of renewable and alternative energies as well as the fuels of the future for decades. Certainly in Alberta's case, a province with the oldest and largest commercialized solar and wind farms, to the point that now they're going through decommissioning as a result of major private sector investments from companies like Suncor and other energy companies in the country. I think it's totally reasonable to have energy executives come here and tell this committee, as well as all Canadians, about those major impacts they make with private sector dollars, which is actually the conservative priority of technology over taxes to achieve emissions reductions globally. So we support the concept of energy executives coming here, but just wonder how this would fit in schedule-wise.
Thanks. Just before I go to Mr. Angus and then to Monsieur Simard, we do have, I booked about 20 minutes at the end of the meeting today for committee business. If we feel that there's going to be a bit more time, we'll see where the discussion goes with our officials and how quickly we can get into starting the meeting. But we do have time at the end of the meeting to discuss the fall work plan and any adjustments I heard from Mr. Bruce, and perhaps an amendment or some sort of massaging of the no motion put forward by Mr. Angus, and and we'll have to look at timing. So we can either continue that now or hear from the last two speakers that I have currently on my list, get into the discussion, and then come back to this at the end of the meeting if that's okay with our members. So we'll go Mr. Angus and then Monsieur Simard.
No, thank you. It does seem like we have interest in this, so I don't want to belabor the point. I don't think this needs a big study like some of the other studies we're doing. I think a meeting where Mr. Kruger and Suncor could come and explain why they've walked away on the transition funding and what they see as urgent in terms of the urgency that Canadians are feeling. I'm ready to vote on it. I think we could have a meeting. If people want to have more executives, we could have more than one meeting. But we have a busy schedule, and I don't want to belabor the point. So I'm ready to vote.
Okay, Monsieur Simard, and then Mr. Drishin.
J'allais proposer.
I was going to suggest, I think we can deal with this in the committee. This would be the best way of working, and I think that I agree with the motion from Charlie. We just have to decide how we're going to work that into our meetings, and perhaps also getting more information from our analysts with regard to the oil sector in order to have a better idea of the situation. I think that if we want to have interesting and well-prepared meetings, it would be important, I think, therefore, to wait a bit and give us the ability to better plan and prepare.
Thank you, Mr. Drishin.
Welcome to everyone. I wasn't really going to say anything until Charlie said, I'm prepared to vote on this right now. So I felt it was important to also put a few more points on the table in case we don't do what Mario had suggested, which is to go and deal with this later today. So I'm not in agreement of voting on this right away, but I really think it's important. The main discussion started off with how the wildfires here in Canada and so on happens to be the least forest fires in the U.S. that they've had in generations right now. But in Canada, yeah, we've got a problem. The problem isn't because of carbon tax. It isn't because of a decision of Suncor. These are forestry issues that should have been dealt with many years prior. So having them come to explain that, I think it was important for, I just want to make sure that everyone recognizes that when we come, it is not simply because they decided that looking at the global situation as far as energy is concerned and the disastrous policies that have affected Europe and other places around, in Australia and other places around the world, that all of a sudden we just want to go and poke a finger at one of Canada's larger employers. And so that is my position on that. And so if we are going to discuss this in public, I think perhaps maybe we would need to have some more time today. But if we want to wait for the vote, then I'm happy, to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Angus.
Well, I certainly think we've heard everyone's position, and I'm interested in talking with Mr. Simard later about how we get more information. But I think we have consensus that we could vote on this. So if we could vote on it, then we could put it into the plan. I'd be happy with that, and I could work with Mr. Simard and my colleagues about what we would need to make sure that we have this in a way that allows us as parliamentarians to do our job, which is to reflect on public policy, particularly at a time of crisis, and report to the Canadian people. So I call a vote.
So, Charlie, what we'll do, I'm willing to take that. There are some details that we'll need to figure out. But if you could read your motion, and then we'll vote on it with the commitment to come back to it during our committee business to look at how we insert it into the existing work plan that we have.
Okay. That given recent comments made by Suncor CEO Richard Kruger, throwing into doubt their previously made commitments to reduce harmful GHG emissions and reflecting a disturbing trend among major oil and gas producers, and given that the Suncor CEO Richard Kruger recently told his board of directors that Suncor will now act with, quote, revised direction and tone, and that he will act with a, quote, sense of urgency to maximize profits through a focus on fossil fuel exploitation, and given the fact that Suncor tripled its profits in a single year while pledging to eliminate 20% of its workforce and already laying off 1,500 workers this year, and given the fact that Canadians have this summer witnessed the effects of unprecedented catastrophic climate disasters, a crisis that any reasonable person would recognize as showing the urgency for GHG emissions reductions, and given that the Canadian oil and gas sector are responsible for 28% of GHG emissions in Canada, and given that Canadians are counting on leaders in the Canadian oil and gas sector to do their part to tackle the global climate change crisis, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Committee of Natural Resources invites Suncor CEO Rich Kruger to committee to explain why he believes the only urgency facing the oil sector is to make as much money as possible while increasing production and abandoning their responsibility to help meet Canada's international climate commitments. That given the urgency of the climate crisis, Mr. Kruger be invited to appear as soon as possible, and that a report of this meeting be prepared and reported to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
Thank you. I had missed Mr. Bruce and was on the list, so I'll have her speak now, and then we'll see where we're at.
Yeah, I just wanted to propose what I think would be a friendly amendment to Mr. Angus's motion, which would be in the last sentence with the invitation part of the wording in the last paragraph, to say Mr. Kruger and other energy executives be invited to appear as soon as possible.
Okay. Mr. Dreeshen.
To speak to the amendment, other energy executives, like you mean from, we were talking about a really quick meeting and so on, so are we talking about energy executives from what field? I guess that's my concern. Simply to say energy executives, there's a dozen people, a dozen CEOs that you could talk to, or many. I don't think that the amendment is as concise as perhaps Charlie had indicated he wanted it to be, where he was just going to talk to the one executive. And again, just to go back, and perhaps I should just stick with the amendment. However, I more or less disagreed with most of what Charlie had said, other than we'd like to invite him to come and talk. Yeah. So.
Go to Mr. Bruce, and if you have a point of clarification to Mr. Dreeshen's concern.
My reference is really to oil and gas energy executives, so I think that if there's wording that we would want to use to try and massage that, but I think where we can just take that as our understanding going forward.
Okay, Ms. Stubbs.
Well, I think the reason that my colleague's point is relevant is because, like what we're seeing here again is this false dichotomy from the left about energy companies in Canada. Of course, it is major multinational oil and gas companies, which are also the major investors in clean tech and innovation and renewable alternative energies and fuels of the future and petrochemicals and hydrogen. So it's not quite as simple as it's just an oil and gas company or only an oil and gas company. There are very few oil and gas companies in Canada that are exclusively focused on oil and gas, because they are multi-pronged energy companies whose expertise, technology, capabilities, skills, and private sector dollars go into the whole array of energy development and all of that innovation and technology required. So that's why Earl's point is relevant.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Stubbs. You're good? Okay, Mr. Somhard's going to pass. Okay, so we have what I heard was an amendment from Mr. Bruce, and we'll deal with first, which would be to amend the under the invitation to have the Suncor executive and executives from the oil and gas sector. So that would
other energy executives, and I think
okay.
We can. Well, that was the wording I proposed. I would keep that, and then
okay.
we know what that. We have the invitation list that we manage.
Okay, So we'll put the vote on the amendment to inserting other energy executives in the invitations. All in favor of that? Okay, so that amendment carries, and then we have the motion as amended that we'll vote on. So all in favor? And opposed? Okay, that's carried. So when we get back to committee business, we can look at where we want to insert into the agenda and putting out the committee list or the witness list and all of those types of details. So with that being dealt with, thank you, members, and thank you for our witnesses for your patience. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses from the four departments. So, and please correct me if I get any of your names wrong, which I inevitably will. From Department of Industry, we have Patrick Hum, Acting Director General, Clean Technology and Clean Growth. From the Department of Environment, Mr. Moffat, welcome back as the Assistant Deputy Minister, Environmental Protection Branch. Department of Finance, some familiar faces here as well. So Miodrag Jovanovic, Assistant Deputy Minister, Tax Policy Branch. Greg Reed, Assistant Deputy Minister, Crown Investment and Asset Management Branch. And Nelson Patterson, Director General, Economic Studies and Policy Analysis Division, Economic Policy Branch. And lastly, from Natural Resources, we have Frank DeRosier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy and Innovation, and we've seen you before, so welcome back. Each of you, I believe, each department has a 5-minute opening statement, and so we'll go into those immediately. Anybody want to go first? Okay, Monsieur DeRosier, feel free, and I'll have the clock here somewhere. I'll give you the signal when the 5 minutes is up, and then we'll move on to the next person. So over to you. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you to launch this round of discussions on this important topic. So I'm accompanied, as you saw, by colleagues from the Department of Finance. We'll be able to unpack some of the measures that are contained in most recent budget document, notably tax measures, from our colleague from Environment to deal with issues ranging from regulatory issues and programs as well from my side. So I hope this group will be helpful in answering your questions. As for me, I'll focus my remarks on the global and North American context, and as well as how NRCan is working with international partners to advance a competitive net zero economy. Canada and the world are faced with dual challenges, addressing climate change on one hand and adjusting to shifting geopolitical contexts. We've all seen what's been happening in Europe with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the dramatic it had in terms of supply for the region, but also quite as dramatic as the impact elsewhere in the world, in the Americas, but also in Asia, where partners are looking for reliable suppliers of critical minerals and energy, and Canada is ideally positioned to support them in that context. Le gouvernement du Canada s'est bien sûr engagé à
The Government of Canada is committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Domestic action and international partnerships will be key to achieving this objective. Canada is not alone in its energy transition ambitions. Many of our allies and competitors recognize the importance of the transition to their economic and strategic well-being.
We're sharp reminders about the importance of continued international cooperation in order to attain our energy security and affordability needs in this low-carbon future. Just as an illustrative point, if you look at what's been announced in the European Union, in the order of 700 billion euros has been committed to accomplish such energy transition. And similarly, in the case of the U.S., with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which was introduced a year or so ago, about $369 billion U.S. for energy and climate-related actions in order to accomplish their very objectives. So those measures, of course, put quite a bit of pressure on us all to be able to compete in this marketplace. Canada has been equally, if not more ambitious in terms of climate action, including $109 billion in spending to date, as well as the price on carbon. On a per capita basis, this is greater than the U.S. as currently committed. Just to illustrate the point, maybe 3 quick examples, and we'll have a chance to unpack them during the session that follows. On critical minerals, NRCan is working with the U.S., EU, Japan, and other friends and allies to develop and secure supply chains needed for the development of the supply for electric vehicles and batteries and so forth. On nuclear, we're also working on advanced nuclear power generation, including SMRs, as well as the nuclear fuel supply. And lastly, on hydrogen, quite a bit of work happening both on East, in Quebec, in Ontario, in the West, to look at developing this very important vector for trade corridors, particularly toward Europe and Asia are eagerly looking for supply for decades to come. In the context of Budget 2023, the government has announced a number of spending and tax measures. We're going to hear from our finance colleagues on those more fully, but they're fairly significant, ranging into tens of billions of dollars for the year to come. So I think the committee, I'm sure, took good notice of those, and happy to entertain questions in that regard. Maybe before closing, to note, we're also working very closely with the U.S. Department of Energy, which has been a very strong part of us for the past decades, on a range of technologies and demonstration and projects that are to shape going forward. And the most recent visit of the U.S. President Biden put a clear emphasis on energy and climate change collaboration. So on this, allow me to close by noting that, again, in the global context, there's significant opportunities for job creation and economic growth, and we're looking to our suite of measures to ensure proper support for workers around the country to benefit from the opportunities that come from energy transitions. So on this, I look forward to the discussion and the questions from all of you.
Yes, thank you for those opening comments. I'll let everybody know that I do have a couple of folders here, so it's a timekeeping thing. When there's 30 seconds left, I'll give you the white folder, and when the time's up, I'll just wave the red, wind up your comments, don't stop mid-sentence, and then we'll move on, and it just keeps things moving. I think we'll go now to our finance officials, if you're ready to go, and whenever you're ready, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to appear today concerning Canada's clean energy plans in the context of North American energy transformation. One of the key themes of Budget 2023 was the announcements of a Made in Canada plan to build a clean economy. Investment tax credits are a key part of that plan, so my remarks today will focus on these investment tax credits. Let me start with the investment tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, which was first announced in Budget 2021, with further details proposed in Budget 2022 and Budget 2023. CCUS technologies are an important tool for reducing emissions in high-emitting sectors where other pathways to reduce emissions may be limited or unavailable. The intent of this tax credit is to incentivize businesses to invest in CCUS to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It would provide a refundable tax credit of 50% for investment in capture equipment, 60% direct air captures, and 37.5% for investment in transportation, storage, and use equipment. It would be available to the extent projects use capture CO2 for dedicated geological storage or storage in concrete, but not enhanced oil recovery. Le deuxième crédit, le crédit d'impôt à l'investissement.
The second credit was announced in the fall 22 economic statement. This is an incentive to encourage businesses to adopt clean technologies to support decarbonization in electricity generation, heating, and industrial activity. This would be a refundable tax credit of 30% with regard to investments in clean technologies. This would be for 2023. The credit would also be available to businesses that invest in clean energy and hydrogen. This would allow businesses to invest in clean hydrogen as an additional energy source that does not emit any greenhouse gases. And this is an important credit for zero carbon. And this would be an important step in reducing carbon emissions and to ensure that the carbon reduction continues with regards to investments in hydrogen by electrolysis and also for carbon capture.
Tax credit announced by the government is the investment tax credit for clean technology manufacturing, which is meant to incentivize businesses to invest in the equipment needed to manufacture clean technologies. It would provide a refundable tax credit of 30% to support investments in machinery and equipment used in the manufacturing of clean technologies, as well as in the extraction and processing of key critical minerals essential for clean technology supply chains. The credit will be available to businesses that incur eligible expenses starting on January 1st, 2024. Last is the investment tax credit for clean electricity, which is intended to incentivize all power producers, both private and public, to make investments that support net zero electricity and expanded clean electricity grid. It would provide a refundable tax credit of 15% to support investment in clean electricity infrastructure. To access the credit, commitments would have to be made by a competent authority in each province and territory that the federal funding would be used to lower electricity bills and to achieve a net zero electricity sector by 2035. The credit would be available as of the day of budget 2024, but only for projects that did not begin construction before March 28, 2023. One novel feature that I would like to highlight is the inclusion of labor requirements, which are meant to ensure workers share the benefits of these investments. In the case of the investment tax credit for CCUS, clean technology, clean hydrogen, and clean electricity, in order to access the highest tax credit rates, businesses would need to pay workers prevailing wages and ensure that apprenticeship opportunities are being created. I'll conclude my remarks with a brief update on the development of these investment tax credits. It's important to note that enacting legislation must receive royal assent before any of the investment tax credits can be administered by the Canada Revenue Agency. Development of the credits is proceeding along different timelines, partly reflecting staggered coming into force dates. In August, the government released draft legislative proposals for the CCUS and clean technology investment tax credits, as well as the associated labor requirements for public consultation. These consultations concluded on September 8. Government is working to release further details on the clean hydrogen investment tax credits, recognizing the importance of finalizing design details and introducing legislation as quickly as possible. This is also the case for the clean technology manufacturing investment tax credit. With respect to the clean electricity investment tax credit, a number of policy issues still need to be established. The Department of Finance will be engaging with provinces, territories, and other relevant parties to develop the design and implementation details. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening comments. And now, Mr. Moffat, if you're ready, we can go to you for your 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about these issues. As this committee has emphasized, the ongoing energy transition presents both opportunities and challenges and will require the transformation of Canadian industries and the labour market. The government recognizes the need both to drive this transformation and to help workers and communities adapt to it, and the work of this committee will be very helpful. In thinking about these issues, it may be helpful to describe or to distinguish three broad objectives. First, we have a variety of policy measures designed to reduce the use in Canada by individuals, businesses, and industries of emitting fuel. The widespread use of clean electricity and other forms of clean energy will be foundational for achieving a net zero emissions economy by 2050. Second, we also have a variety of policy measures designed to reduce the emissions from the production of carbon-based fuels. Even as Canada reduces the demand, our own demand for oil and gas, there's going to be continued demand by other countries. So to the extent that Canadian companies respond to that demand, we need to ensure that they produce that fuel as cleanly as possible. And third, the government is supporting the development of clean energy and associated technologies and components throughout the supply chain, both to support the domestic energy transition and to take advantage of the growing global demand for clean energy. These goals are being supported by the all-of-government approach described by my colleagues with a wide range of measures. I'll now speak for a moment about our approach to regulations. While we appreciate the importance of regulatory stability for attracting investment, we're also working in an unprecedented situation in which there is a need to drive further greenhouse gas reductions and to build the regulatory and policy foundation for the clean energy transition. In this fluid context, We are trying to operate in a way that is as transparent as possible, signaling clearly the various new regulatory measures that we are developing, and engaging extensively to ensure that these regulations are well designed and can provide a durable basis for long-term investments. I'd like to reassure the committee that our work to decide when to regulate, how to target regulations, and what requirements to include is informed by the considerations that you've identified. The regulatory impact analysis statements that accompany every federal regulation, for example, provide detailed information about technical and economic feasibility and regional employment and other economic impacts, all factors that we consider throughout the development of all of our regulations. To attract investment in clean energy projects, the government also recognizes the need to make project approvals as predictable and efficient as possible. These objectives are the focus of the Budget 2023 commitment to improve the efficiency of the federal impact assessment and permitting processes for major projects in Canada. I look forward to your questions and to the results of your important work. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to our representative from industry, Mr. Hum. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today representing the Department on the subject of clean energy. ISED's mandate is to work with Canadians in all areas of the economy to improve conditions for investment, enhance innovation performance, increase Canada's share of global trade, and build a fair, efficient, and competitive marketplace. The Department has a purview across a wide range of industrial sectors, from steel and aluminum to chemical and plastics, cement and concrete, critical minerals, clean technologies, automobiles, aerospace, space, and marine, to digital, AI, and quantum, to name several. As ISED undertakes its work, there is recognition that the competitiveness and growth potential for Canadian industry will include access and use of clean energy. For instance, the use of hydrogen and renewable natural gas could significantly lower the emissions intensities of industries like steel and cement. However, as the mandate for the committee's study quite rightly points out, Canadian businesses face stiff competition as other countries, including the United States, seek to provide their industries with a similar clean energy advantage. Le Canada et quelques autres pays souhaitent trouver des façons de réduire.
Canada and other countries are seeking to reduce their emissions by using clean energies. And thanks to our dynamism, we are very strongly positioned in regard to the fight to reduce emissions and using things like wind technology and others. This is a very innovative approach. In this context, ISED uses its range of regulatory, legislative, policy, and program tools to support the government's clean growth and clean energy priorities. For example, ISED and Natural Resources Canada deliver the Clean Growth Hub Initiative, a unique whole-of-government focal point dedicated to helping Canadian clean technology innovators and adopters navigate the vast array of federal programs and services most relevant to their needs. Since its creation in 2017, the hub has served over 2,700 small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada, leveraging the knowledge, expertise, and network of its 17 member departments and agencies to provide tailored advice. In 2022, approximately 44% of its clients were companies in the clean energy sector.
The Industrial Decarbonization Team, or IDT, to support large-scale clean energy and decarbonization projects through enhanced collaboration across departments on federal programs and regulatory issues. The IDT assesses and provides advice on projects that require more tailored support in view of their complexity and ability to accelerate Canada's path to a competitive net zero economy. Another part of the federal government's clean technology and clean energy toolkit is the Strategic Innovation Fund's Net Zero Accelerator. The $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator initiative is a tool to help support Canada-wide GHG emission reduction targets, groundbreaking investments in low-carbon fuels, and clean energy-related technologies in areas such as fuel cells, small modular reactors, and wind energy. Clean energy-related investments include a $15 million contribution to AVL Fuels Canada for a hydrogen fuel cells R&D center in Vancouver, and $25 million to LN Wind Power Blades for the expansion of large, complex wind turbine blade production in the Gas Bay. Budget 2023 provided an additional $500 million to the program to support clean technologies and also redirected $1.5 billion of its existing resources towards projects in clean technologies, critical minerals, and industrial transformation. With that, thank you, and I'd be happy to take your questions.
Great, thank you, and thank you to all of the officials for the very tight opening comments. Really appreciate it. We're going to now get into our first round of questions. For the members, we should be able to get through at least the first two rounds, possibly a bit of the third. I will let you know that Mr. Morris has, and welcome Mr. Morris to our committee, as well as Mr. Fonseca. If there is time at the end, Mr. Morris has requested time, which would require unanimous consent, unless somebody offers their time as we go through the rounds. So we'll deal with that when we get to the end. But first up, we have Ms. Stubbs, who will have 6 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, officials, for being here. Nice to see you all as well again. Mr. Moffat, certainly in your comments, Conservatives on this side of the table looked at each other in full agreement with you that global oil and gas demand will continue to increase. That's why Conservatives believe the very last barrel of oil and gas used in the world ought to be from Canada instead of the Liberal approach, which is to cede ground to dictators, despots, and regimes with much lower environmental standards. And I must confess, it's a little bit odd to hear comments about the clear requirement in Canada to reduce permitting and regulatory timelines and fix the impact assessment agency. I say this on behalf of all Conservative colleagues at this table, but I guess in particular because it just happened to actually be specifically me during the debates in C-69 warning that the government's spin on the legislative timelines that that bill would implement, in fact, wasn't true, and that there were multiple ways in which that bill had the ability for both members of the regulatory body as well as the cabinet to stop, start, and extend the regulatory process repeatedly over private sector proponents. And at that time, I can also say, because it was, again, just sort of oddly, specifically me and Conservatives who warned that what that would do would be to create potentially endless timelines and uncertainty for private sector proponents, and therefore make the regulatory decisions and permitting for all kinds of energy projects in Canada uncompetitive against the rest of the world. I'm not sure why Canadians ought to believe that the government that brought in this system that's broken in the first place will be the ones to fix it. But suffice to say, Conservatives agree with those two main principles that you talked about. To the Finance Department officials, one thing I'd like you to explore a bit more for this committee and for Canadians is the difference between investment and production tax credits. One of the main reasons that the U.S. IRA is a threat to Canadian competitiveness, of course, is their inclusion of production tax credits, which are ongoing and they're based on actual outcomes, actual environmental and energy results. Rather than in Canada's context only that first-time early initiative incentive. I invite any or all of you to make any comments on that, maybe the relative advantages and disadvantages of investment versus production tax credits, and any consideration of that in Canada's context.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. So that is a fundamentally important question. I mean, in Canada, we tend to favor investment tax credits as opposed to production tax credits. In the United States, they're using both. More recently, in the IRA, have expanded significantly on their production tax credits. They had that in their system already before. I mean, the investment tax credits basically supports investments, capital investment, upfront. So it has, in a way, the advantage when it comes to securing financing, that to be able to count on that upfront. With respect, well, production tax credit basically support OPEX, operating expenses. I mean, it's going to vary depending on the project as to which one is preferred in a way. I think it's back to the relationship between initial capital spending and OPEX. In the United States, production tax credits would last between 10 and 12 years, depending on the credit, which also means that if you do a major investment upfront, that you can count on that for maybe 10 years, but after that, it's done. So that's another way to look at that. If you have really a major infrastructure kind of project that is very costly, sometimes you may prefer the investment tax credits up front because you get it up front and you get it for effectively the whole life of the project. I mean, and often it goes up to 20 years easily, right? So it's a question of choice and a question of the predisposition in a way. The systems are also very different in Canada and the United States. In Canada, we do have a national carbon pricing regime. In the United States, they don't, and that is kind of factored in the idea of how do you want to support things. In a way, being able to sell your carbon credits is a way to bank that in addition to the investment tax credits. So that's the context and comparison.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. It seems to me that production tax credits poses an especially challenging competitiveness issue for Canada, especially for the development of projects like hydrogen and critical minerals and manufacturing. On the issue of permitting reform, and since you've raised it, of course, the U.S. IRA bill, as well as their debt ceiling bill, took very aggressive actions on reducing permitting and regulatory timeframe. Their debt ceiling bill has a target for under 2 years. The IRA is obviously wants to pursue permitting timeline reductions. This seems to me to be the low-hanging fruit on which Canada should take full control of our own situation to be able to compete rather than trying to chase the U.S. down a dollar-for-dollar subsidy spiral. So the trouble, of course, for Canada is that it takes up to 25 years to get a mine built. The disaster for Canada is already demonstrated in terms of LNG, where the U.S. built 7 LNG projects, approved 20 more in the same timeline that we've only have 3 approved and 1 actually being constructed. So can you give any concrete details in terms of timelines that are under consideration for those assessment reform, and when will Canadians and all of us know what the intended timeline reductions are?
Sorry, we ran out of time. That's the 6 minutes. But that may be something that one of your colleagues or others on the committee may want to pick up when it comes back to them. But yeah, good round of questions. We're going to go next to Mr. Shahal, who will have 6 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officials, for joining us today. I'm going to start with Mr. Hum. You talked about the importance of renewable energy to attracting business in Canada and some of the sectors from steel and others. How important is having a clean energy grid important to attracting business to Canada?
Certainly, I would say extremely important in industries which are particularly export intensive and trade exposed. Access to clean energy to reduce their carbon intensity. We see that in a sector like aluminum, for instance, where Canada produces amongst the lowest carbon intensive aluminum in the world. These are important factors for export markets, and so industries definitely look at Canada and these industries in particular to have access to clean energy.
Thank you. And I'm going to move over to Mr. Jovanovic. You talked a lot about the ITCs, and I want to focus in. With the ITCs, how many billions of dollars of economic activity and jobs do you anticipate Canada to receive with the ITCs you've put in place?
Thank you for your question. I can talk about investment in terms of the money that the spending that these ITCs would represent for Canada. I may turn to my colleague to see if he has anything to add, which I'm not sure. But to give you some idea, over the next 5 years, we project the cost of the 5 ITCs I mentioned to be nearly $28 billion. If you project that to the next 10 years, that is more than $64 billion. And next 12 years, I mean, by their expiry dates, we're at about $83 billion of foregone revenues, if you will. So it is very very important.
Thank you. And what are you hearing from the industry in Alberta? Alberta Conservatives have put a moratorium on renewable energy in Alberta. We've seen some experts say $33 billion of losses and thousands of jobs that are going to be impacted. Have you heard from industry on the impacts, and can you verify those numbers?
I haven't really had any discussion on that specific aspect. I haven't been, industry hasn't reached out to me directly on this, so I can't really comment on
Mr.
that.
De Rosiers from Natural Resources, could you comment on the impact on the industry? Have you heard from the Canadian renewable sector on the impact of a moratorium and on industry moving forward, job losses and investment?
So we certainly heard a number of companies who expressed kind of preoccupation about the state of the marketplace, but given how recent those development has been, I don't think we have any quantitative assessment of what the dollar value of the impact this would be. And my understanding is the Alberta government is quite seized with the importance to try to go through this process in a timely way to ensure that the investment climate, which led to so many great project in Alberta. It was noted early on by one of the committee members. We've had a record number of great clean energy projects in Alberta at a very low cost. So I think both the provincial government and the country overall benefit very much from those. So I think everybody's motivated to make sure that those rules of the game are established quickly and the investments can flow.
So why a moratorium? Why stall the industry when it's growing and being a national leader? $33 billion and thousands of job losses, those are big numbers. Do you think there'll be a drastic impact to the renewable energy sector with this moratorium?
I don't think it would be appropriate as a federal official for me to comment on how the province wants to carry it. It's fair, but what I can certainly emphasize, as it was illustrated by Minister Wilkinson in recent statement and the electricity grid that was recently established, is that there's a great deal of need for clean power in this country. And this is the reason why in the budget 2023 there was such emphasis around expenditure and tax measures that our colleagues from Finance Tax just spoke to make sure we're able to significantly expand the size of the clean power production in the country. The estimates vary depending on which source you rely, but I think there's a broad agreement that we need to at least double the size of the power grid between now and 2050. Just think of that. Like it took us, a century and a half or so to build the grid as we know it today? Twice that. So recognizing how big those projects are and complex it is and how important it is to make sure that our workers, our communities are consulted in this is not a small feat. And countries around the world, Canada, US, Europe, are faced with similar challenges. The good news is Canada has lots of options in terms of clean power, whether it's you're looking at hydro, looking at wind, at solar, at a range of other options, nuclear. We are capable of getting there, but it will require quite a lift from the old country.
Yeah, we are faced with blackouts or potential blackouts over the winter and summer months, so I was shocked when I heard about the moratorium. You would agree that all sources of energy are important as we move forward. I believe you said that, correct?
It's been the government view that we want to encourage all of those different sources. Again, Canada is blessed with such options, so might as well use it. We're the envy of the world. Every time we meet with foreign delegation, that's one thing that they take away from us.
Thank you.
Time on that round. We're going to continue on and go to Monsieur Simard, who will have 6 minutes on the clock.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to explain to you, Mr. Desrosiers, but also your other colleagues as well, if they want to comment. A question that keeps coming up when we talk about energy in Canada. Grosso modo, citizens are responsible for about 20% of emissions in Canada. The various economic activities are also responsible for emissions, especially gas and oil. And what we've been doing since I've been here in 2019 is to continue to invest in dirty oil and gas that's a little bit less dirty, and this seems to continue in the current budget. There has been billions of dollars for low emissions, but when I look at 2022, all the major oil companies, $220 billion in profits, a record. And what we talk about here at the Resources Committee is how can we help these people to decarbonize their sector? And does that mean that low emission oil can be profitable, and if the taxpayer has to assume the risks of continuing the investment in the oil sector, I think that that's wrong. And I wonder when we're going to get out of this oil impasse, because with the federal government's policies, and you said in response earlier that we have an advantage for wind power and sun power, but you continue to invest in the oil sector, and the difference between wind power and sun power and oil. I mean, is there any distinction made at the ministry? Very broad question, Chair. I'll try to answer. And I take note of the committee's concerns with regard to the size of the oil industry. There is transportation and that are contribute to emissions, and then households, and certainly oil and gas are major contributors to emissions. The government tries to invest in all industrial sectors, including oil and gas, and help them to reduce emissions and to have technologies, for example, that will be applicable to all sectors. And I think that we have various measures. And when we look at the International Energy Association predictions, there will always be some oil and gas production in the world because it will continue to be needed, but the emissions will drop. But thank you. I understand, Mr. De Rosier, but I'll give you an example. I went with you to Berlin, where we met people from Siemens who explained to the minister that if we wanted to develop a blue hydrogen, they think that they will never achieve this technology because there's the risks in the market, because blue hydrogen costs a great deal. And I remember the fellow from Siemens said that there's also a technological risk. And I'm sure that no government will want to assume the risks for this kind of technology, and in order to really integrate this into our energy sector. And so one of the biggest energy businesses, companies, Siemens, say that the costs are much too high. And I see a government that's ready to invest in huge amounts in this same technology. And are we not? I mean, of course, we want to decarbonize energy, but are we not rather serving the interests of the major oil and gas producers? I think that the position of the government is to reduce emissions and to have less emissions-intensive sectors. There are different pathways to achieve this objective. And the use of natural gas, for example, with carbon capture will allow for very low carbon emissions. And I don't think there's much of a concern with regard to this kind of technology. And there are many companies, including Canadian companies, that are ready to invest and propose technologies for this purposes. And I think that for 30 years we've been doing this kind of project, and they've been tested to scale, and we've seen that there are projects in the east and in the west where they have had excellent results.
In response?
I would say just, yeah, we're actually out of time on this one. So,
no problem.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Angus, just to make sure everybody gets their rounds of questions. And so, Mr. Angus, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. This is a really important discussion. Since the Ukraine war, we've seen massive investments in Europe to move forward on clean tech and get off Russian oil and gas. Since the Biden administration came in, we've seen $240 billion in clean energy, $70 billion in the electric vehicle supply chain, $10 billion in solar manufacturing. There's a real concern that if we don't move fast, we are going to be left on the sidelines as that investment dollars moves into the United States. So, Mr. Jovanovic, is finance looking at this with a sense of urgency? I know Mr. Kruger from Suncor believes the urgency is Suncor make as much money as possible. Other Canadians think the urgency is dealing with the climate crisis. Does finance believe that getting these tax credits out fast is of an urgent matter?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. The short answer is yes. We are working diligently on finalizing draft legislative proposals for all of these 5 credits. So as I mentioned in my remarks already, in August, we released for consultation draft legislative proposals for the clean tech investment tax credit, as well as for the CCUS, which was kind of we're approaching the finish line on this one. We've been consulting already 3 times. As well as the labor requirements with respect to the 4 that will apply to 4 investment tax credits. Our goal is for coming by the end of this fall to be able to release draft legislative proposals, then the next one on the clean hydrogen ITC, and then the clean tech manufacturing ITC.
Thank you. In terms of the clean manufacturing credit, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the one that did not have labor obligations for apprenticeship or prevailing wage standards, whereas the Biden administration has made it very clear to blue-collar workers in the United States that manufacturing of clean tech is going to be tied to jobs. So why have the department left those apprenticeship and prevailing wage standards out of the manufacturing for clean tech?
We can double check that. My understanding is that with respect to the advanced manufacturing production tax credit in the United States, that labor requirements do not apply. They may apply for the advanced energy project credit, which is the small remaining credit that is worth about $10 billion compared to, depending on the estimate, of course, between $30 billion and $250 billion for the other one, for which the labor requirements, again, based on my understanding, do not apply.
Because when I talk to workers in the building trades, IBEW, workers particularly in the energy sector, they want to know that they're going to be part of this and not left on the sidelines. Mr. DeRossi, I'd like to ask you in terms of the urgency of getting this off the ground, given the amount of international competition. Calgary Economic Development recently did a study that 170,000 jobs alone would be created in Alberta because there's no place else in Canada that has even close to the potential that Alberta has. Yet we've seen the Danielle Smith government, for ideological reasons, kill billions of dollars in investment. That investment is threatened to go south. Have you analyzed the potential impact of not getting those projects off the ground and whether or not that investment is going to go stateside?
As I mentioned in my previous response, we don't have any quantitative estimates of this. We did hear preoccupation by firms that have been voiced, including publicly. I think all of us would have seen it in the media, and the urging to try to bring to that investment climate so that the money can start flowing quickly. But I'm encouraged that we'll eventually get there, hopefully soon.
So I certainly hope so. We've certainly spoken to many people in the West who are really ready to take advantage, and they've got the expertise, and if we lose that moment, it's going to hurt us. Mr. Moffat, I wanted to ask you if you had read the recent International Energy Agency report that was released last week on the need to de-risk from financial investments in fossil fuels. Has your department read that report?
Yes, we have, certainly.
Because they're saying, quote, we are witnessing the beginning end of the fossil fuel era. We have to prepare ourselves for the next era. Fatih Baril states from the IEA, quote, oil and gas companies may not only be misjudging public opinion, they will be misjudging the market if they expect further growth of oil and gas demand across this decade. New large-scale fossil fuel projects carry not only major climate risks, but major financial risks. So how do you assess the IEA's warnings to companies that are preferring to drill down on oil and gas rather than diversify? Do you think that is a threat to our economic competitiveness?
Well, I think the government is wrestling with the question of what is the right balance in terms of driving domestic reduced demand for oil and gas, something we can control and where we are well ahead of the rest of the world, versus the question of what is the role of Canadian oil and gas in responding to global demand? Your question then is, are there competitiveness risks in overemphasizing domestic production?
Well, it's also climate risk. I mean,
we're out of time on this one, so there's not going to be time for any back and forth here, but thank you. We're going to go now to a 5-minute round for the first two questioners, and first up I have Mr. Falk. So when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to the officials for your presentations. Mr. Desrosiers, I'm going to start with you a little bit. You talked about being a dependable supply chain to new energy sources. We know that mining is going to be critical to that. We know that exporting clean energy like LNG is going to be critical to meeting those objectives. How has Bill C-69 impacted what you say is critical to moving forward?
So in a way, it's always a preoccupation issue around the legislation itself, but also the regulatory environment writ large. Allow me just maybe to make 3 observations. I hope they'll... Of course, understood. Like the preoccupation around timeliness and efficiency is something that has been very clearly captured in the budget 2023, and I can assure you, Mr. Wilkinson, see this as very much top of the pile in terms of things that he wants to tackle with industry and PTs. This was discussed at the most recent annual meetings of provincial and territorial ministers in Quebec City last month. So really a top preoccupation. There was $1.2 billion announced also to provide funding for regulatory agencies, Impact Assessment Agency, Canada Energy Regulator, to speed up permitting, to make sure that those projects get moving. And as part of the Regional Energy and Resources Table, which I understand you've been briefed previously in presentation by Minister Wilkinson, the pace has been picking up with BC, but also provinces around the country to launch those. And many provinces did identify the issue of regulatory efficiency as a key preoccupation that they want to see progress on. So there's lots of engagement going on and a shared goal to try to speed it up.
Thank you. Mr. Jovanovich, I just want to ask you a few questions. Recently, this government made a commitment both to Volkswagen and Stellantis. Can you confirm the amounts of those commitments?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, we don't have the people responsible for this at finance, so I can't really...
We'll have to come back to you on that. We can get those numbers, but from an ISAID perspective, we can share those numbers at a later date.
Well, I would surely think so. I'm surprised that finance wouldn't have those numbers crisp, and the media seems to have them. I'm surprised you wouldn't.
Our colleagues that are responsible for those deals aren't at the table today.
Okay. I guess then you probably wouldn't know then whether it's being looked at as a PTS or a PTC or an ITC. Minister Champagne alluded to one point that there wouldn't be any commitment by Canada until there was actual production. So I wanted to confirm what the vehicle for that support would be.
I can comment on that. So there's a range of support that's being provided from capital support through the Strategic Innovation Fund, and then bespoke agreements that will act as production subsidies. So you're quite right that funding will be paid on the basis of production. So in terms of the energy produced for battery units. So if there's no production, there's those parts of the support don't flow out. Although the capital would flow out at the front end as per normal practice as they build the facilities.
So the capital would flow out, but it's based on production.
No, just that there's different components of support. Okay. So the facilities are recipients of Strategic Innovation Fund support, which is traditionally structured on the capital, so building facilities, some of the equipment. I don't know the details, okay. But I said can get back to you on that.
Okay. Can you also confirm whether the Parliamentary Budget Officer is correct that the payback isn't 5 years, but it's 20 years?
I can't confirm that.
You haven't done the math in your department, or is that those other people that aren't here?
Well, no, we've done the math, but you said the public reporting and then the Parliamentary Budget Office, I would assume, worked with our colleagues to answer questions.
So who's right?
The F-35s. Perhaps
nobody knows.
I could add some color to that. So there are two approaches that have been used. The calculations were made by ISAID for the federal government number, but basically they're just using different methodologies based on similar underlying assumptions about what the projects would be. So it's a choice about what the PBO is using for their assumptions.
I think I have one question left.
That's the 5 minutes. It goes fast. We're going to go now to Madame Lapointe, who will have 5 minutes on her clock.
Thank you very much. My first question for Mr. Desrosiers. In Sudbury, we know that we have a natural advantage in the area of essential minerals and mining and
Action Act. What steps are we taking to ensure that critical minerals are refined domestically?
Yeah, from the get-go, when Canada enunciated that goal and the Prime Minister made that commitment and again reiterated in the budget, we made it clear that the ambition was looking at the full suite. So not just the extraction, resource extraction, but looking at processing and transformation all the way to batteries and vehicles. So the strategic plan that was announced, the Canadian Critical Mineral Strategy, $3.8 billion, has all of those kind of support present. And it's been now vetted in-house and approved. And the work is on the way to make it happen. So it'd be hard to summarize in 1 minute how the $3.8 billion will be dispersed, but it goes across the entire value chain. And right now, there's a lot of emphasis on international collaboration to try to speed up technologies to extract the resource in a way that is environmentally friendly. We do not want to replicate the approach that has been used in other countries like China, so that we can minimize the impact on land and air and water. So there's a lot of good work happening with the Americans, the Japanese, and the Europeans on this right now.
Okay. So I'm pleased with that response, and I'm going to take it one step further. So I believe that the supply chain and the associated jobs should remain local to the resources' geographical locations, especially when you think about reducing our processing footprint. So what is Canada doing to create a framework for processing the critical minerals necessary for EV batteries to ensure the value-added benefits are not moved outside of Canada and outside of its mining regions?
I must say, when we have engagement with foreign investors, we're talking with Japanese actually this week, with the Germans last week, they actually see this as a benefit for their investments. So the fact they don't have to ship, as it is the case right now, their feedstock across the world back and forth multiple times. It's truly a crazy setup that we currently have and just cannot be scaled up at the scale that the planet needs it to, in terms of having those hundreds of millions of EVs, electric vehicles on the road. So the fact that Canada is able to supply those locally, whether it's in a region or in a city or nearby, is one of those key reasons why they made those large investments, whether it's Volkswagen, whether it's Stellantis, and others to come. So there's not one solution to make it happen, but bringing together all the key actors in this space, from the raw extraction to the fabricators of anode, of cathodes, of batteries, of electric vehicles themselves, to talk and engage. And the deal making has been happening very rapidly. Canada has oftentimes been the convener of those groups of domestic and foreign investors to make this happen, but we've had dozens and dozens of commitments being made, and many of them announced already.
Thank you. So it's important that the work of natural resources and finance are working together. And so my question is to the Ministry of Finance. I often hear from stakeholders that we need to facilitate the mining of natural resources in Canada. So with Canada's critical minerals being a key component of batteries for zero-emission vehicles, how are we increasing funding for critical mineral production? And how can we ensure that that funding is accessible expeditiously?
Well, I can start. I don't know if Patrick wants to lead in as well, but in the context of funding announced through the budget for critical minerals, there was explicitly different parts of that funding for different parts of the value chain. And so through our industrial support programs, they've taken aim at different parts of that supply chain. Maybe I'll just pass it over to Patrick on that funding part.
So ISAT has access to $1.5 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund for critical minerals. The department has already made investments in several companies, including E3 Lithium and Rio Tinto Ferry Titan. Those are important critical mineral-related investments. I think the investments in the automotive supply chain and others are really telling in terms of where Canada stands. The other aspect I'd raise, and to Frank's point, access to clean energy to process some of these minerals is extremely important, right? So it just lowers the carbon intensity for these products as they get into the value chain.
That's the 5 minutes. We're now going to go to Monsieur Simard, who will have 2.5 minutes on the clock.
Thank you very much. A quick question. When we talk about critical numbers, and Mr. Desrosiers, I think it was in 2023 that we had the list of critical minerals that was established. Is that right? I think the Canadian list was before that, I think. I think it was maybe 2020. No, but the opening to allow for the adding of new minerals. Was it 23 or 24? And that I can't tell you. But certainly there's been that change. Well, right now there are two major projects. You have phosphate that is on the list of critical minerals, and that gives us some advantage with regard to developments in this area, as well as for research and development programs. And phosphate, pure phosphate that we find in the enterprises concerned is very important for batteries. But I think I've heard that there is difficulty getting responses from the ministry with regard to the issue of phosphate, investment in phosphate, and adding phosphate to the list of critical minerals. I can certainly undertake to look into that for you. Thank you very much. And also something else that piqued my curiosity, Mr. Hume, when you talked about aluminum, you said that there was work to decarbonize the aluminum sector, if I understood correctly. And what were you referring to that? Is that with regard to propellers and blades? And I'm in my writing, we are aluminum producers. We're one of the biggest in the world. And even before the propeller blades, so when people say that we're trying to decarbonize the aluminum sector, and the new technologies require less or fewer workers, and so there will be a job loss with these new programs and a lot of the aluminum and a lot of the production, I remind you, will be in Quebec. And so, do you have any response?
Désolé. So we won't have time for response. We'll now go to Mr. Angus.
Thank you. The Department of Energy in the United States has said that just 2 laws that have been brought in under the Biden administration will cut greenhouse gas emissions by up to 41% below 2005 levels by 2030, and that what's being done with the IRA will commit that even further. But Canada's Environment Commissioner has stated that Canada's target for 2030 is very unrealistic and likely not going to happen. And he mentions particularly based on false claims or hopes for hydrogen. So, Mr. Moffat, what do you think in terms of the need to actually hit targets, because we missed every single one that's been promised under this government?
I take issue with your last point. We've missed targets established by previous governments. We haven't missed any target established by this government. I also think it's important to understand that the United States economy is starting from a very different place than Canada. United States, Canada, as my colleagues have emphasized, starts with much more significant clean electricity. So whereas the U.S. has the opportunity to significantly decarbonize by reducing emissions from electricity, we're already at over 80% clean electricity. So we're starting ahead. That's not to say that targets are not important or that meeting our targets are not important. And I would just emphasize that the government has a statutory commitment to issue a progress report under the emission reductions under the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act this fall, and so you'll see all of the government's projections this fall.
I only have 2.5 minutes, so I like the fact that we were starting ahead, but now we're further behind, and that worries me. You said it was previous governments. I mean, I don't mind beating up on the Harper government all the time, but the fact is the Environment Commissioner said we can't keep going from failure to failure to failure. That's how he's described us missing every single target. So are you saying that we haven't missed those targets? And which ones?
I frankly don't. I think he's referring to previous targets established by previous governments. This government has a 2030 target. You can't.
And do you think we'll get it?
This government is confident that we'll get there.
Okay, thank you.
And now we will go to Mr. Dreeshen, who has 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I guess just to talk about what Charlie had mentioned, the information that we have on climate and energy provisions, the Biden administration has set a goal for reducing U.S. greenhouse emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 by 2030. Provisions in the IRA will not allow the U.S. to achieve its 2030 target, but they're expected to improve on existing policies. The U.S. doesn't expect that they're going to be able to handle this either. So, I mean, that's from the documentation that we had from the library. I guess one of the other things that I want to talk about, reliable supplier of critical minerals. Yes, we have that as an opportunity. However, we can't even move forward on any types of projects. So I'm really going to be interested in seeing how the members of Parliament are going to deal with that particular issue. The other part is, and you've mentioned how Canada's always been further ahead. You know, the U.S. Department of Energy, and I believe, Mr. DeRoche, you had talked about the U.S. Department of Energy on technology, we used to be the leaders. And if we don't get our act together, we're going to end up being the followers, and we're going to end up having to buy technology from around the world because we're not allowing our industry to be able to expand. That's the reason why we were able to be this leader. So that's the first part. The other thing, Fatim Myril from the International Energy Agency had indicated that the change, the difference between the heavy oil coming out of Alberta and traditional oil and gas, that the difference in that was equivalent to 1 day's emissions in China. So does it matter if China catches up on January 1st of 2030 or 2040 or January 2nd? So, but we have managed to demonize the energy that is coming out of Alberta for whatever reason, and I haven't quite figured that one out. The other question, the other point that was just mentioned was the brownouts in Alberta. So we had two members, one from the NDP and one from the Liberals, attacking the provincial government for talking about, let's look at what is really occurring here. Well, the brownouts that occurred, they came about because of hot weather and low winds. And so when you have a massive amount of energy, which we do have in Alberta, coming from wind, however, you're less than 1% efficiency because there's no wind, no wonder we have some issues. But that also means there's issues with the renewables that we have at present because they can't keep up. We don't have a grid system that can manage it either. And the concerns, the major concerns is no one has sat down and said, how do we deal with the reclamation that is needed for solar farms and for wind farms? We see what is happening around the world. So those are things that we need to kind of consider too. So the comments that came about to attack the Alberta government, all they're doing is being responsible to say, we better have this figured out because that cost is going to be massive as well. Yeah. And the other point that was brought out about Siemens, I don't know if anybody has figured out what is happening with Siemens in Germany, but there are major issues with their windmills and major concerns. In July, I think, of this year, 37% drop in their market share because of the problems they have with windmills. So do you think it is maybe an important thing to talk about renewables? Because for some reason, as I've said many times in this committee, we have to talk about the energy requirements from the first shovel we use to dig something up to the last shovel we use to cover it up. And until we do that, what are we really talking about in natural resources? So, Mr. DeRoche, I pretty well talked most of my time through here, but if you could give us some sense of where we are going to go. We have followed a path. We have done the political thing and looked at people pointing fingers. So we followed that path. But what are we going to do in the future so that we are actually the leaders around the world that we have been for generations?
That was the point I thought maybe emphasizing. I like your point about Canada showing that leadership technology-wise, and we've been the case for the past so many years. And I must say, we heard just earlier from our ISED colleagues how many of those clean tech firms are present in the country. 2,800 firms who have reached out and engaged. And this is actually, and most of those export their products and services. About 90+% of their sales are abroad in the US and Europe and beyond. There's a great deal of interest out there for this kind of marketplace and being able to continue to drive ahead and attract the capital and the investments we need to supply the market. But I'm actually quite optimistic about Canada's prospect in this area.
And good timing. That's the end of the 5 minutes. We'll now go to Mr. Sabera for his the final 5 minutes of this round.
Thank you, Chair. Great to see you again, and welcome to all my colleagues and to the witnesses. I'd like to go to ADM Moffat. In your remarks, in the last paragraph of your remarks, you reference Budget 2023's commitment to improve the efficiency of the federal impact assessment and permitting process for major projects in Canada, which I think is critical for us on the EV supply chain. Just to give you an example, or even to move online with further nuclear projects in the province of Ontario and the ones that are announced. And I'm not going to go into too much detail there because it'd take a long time. Europe and the United States have both made announcements within the last, I would say, 6 months to a year on speeding up the processes with regards to permitting, both on the renewable front and the non-renewable front. Can you kind of give some indication on the $1 billion that we put in? I think it's approximately $1 billion in the budget to make sure the Impact Assessment Agency is even more effective than it currently is today.
Well, I can speak to that very, very briefly, but I'd start by saying the commitment is not about the Impact Assessment Agency, nor is the commitment about the Impact Assessment Act. The commitment is about permitting. In fact, the majority of projects in Canada, the majority of investments that we've talked about today, don't go through the impact assessment regime. The Impact Assessment Act has nothing to do with the majority of projects. However, most projects in Canada are subject to a variety of federal and provincial regulatory requirements and permitting requirements. And so the commitment is to try to align and expedite decision-making across that full suite of regulatory and permitting requirements. The focus on the Impact Assessment Act is in fact a red herring.
First of all, thank you for that for clarification. I was hoping you would bring that out. Secondly, with regards to what's happening today in North America, when I define North America, obviously define our largest trading partner and obviously a very large trading partner in Mexico. We have seen a transition that is going on. At the same time, recently, a very successful, very large Canadian energy company, Enbridge Inc., purchased 3 natural gas companies in the United States, about a $10 billion capital investment, done very successfully through the markets. There was an equity raise and bond financing that accompanied that. And I was reading about that over the last few days. It is a North American energy market. And I would like to hear, specifically on natural gas, how our trading partners are viewing that energy source, where we had a leading North American Canadian-based company, obviously increase their presence within that sector. Thank you. You're nodding, Mr. DeRose. So.
I'll give it a shot. Feel free to add, John. Totally agree that when we think energy, you've got to think, and the motion and the study that you're launching now very much takes that perspective. Taking a North American energy perspective, that's really the way to look at it, and especially true in the case of natural gas, where we see those networks and pipeline being deeply integrated. And I would add to this that they become even more global now thanks to LNG facilities, and Canada will be having its own facilities out west, where suddenly the connection on the west coast for Canada with the Asian market to the US market, where many of the gas is channeled through our infrastructure assets, goes to Europe and beyond. So that kind of connection now is spanning not just the continent, but beyond.
Thank you. And my final kind of comment is on this two-track trajectory, which I call two-track trajectory, where we are seeing substantial investments in the clean energy transition. And we see that here in the province of Ontario with announcements on SMRs. With that, there is an energy tax credit, or I forget the name of the energy tax credit we provided within budget 2023, and I applaud significantly. And at the same time, further growth in the renewable assets, be it on solar, wind, and so forth. And you're seeing that across the pond. Right now, my understanding is 84% of the Canadian electricity grid is clean energy. Is that correct?
It's over 80%, yeah.
It's over 80%. Yeah. And by your estimates, what would be the requirement in terms of how large our electricity grid, would have to become to meet the increasing demands of the transition to use clean electricity products, including EVs?
I can start. So I think the honest answer is nobody knows exactly, but we know that demand for electricity is going to increase significantly. My colleague referred to an estimate of double. The recent regulatory impact assessment statement that we issued for the clean electricity regulations had a couple of scenarios. One was a 1.5 growth, another was a larger growth. We see estimates from credible third parties ranging from 1.5 to 3 times growth. So the answer is a very significant growth across all forms of clean energy over the next few decades. a large lift, as my colleague explained in his opening remarks.
So yeah, we're going to have to end there. That's just over the 5-minute mark. So colleagues, we're at 5:30. We do have some committee business we need to get to. We're slightly ahead of where we wanted to be. I could squeeze out 4 2-minute rounds or 2.5 minutes, or we want to do that? Okay, so we'll go first then to Mr. Patzer for 2.5 minutes.
I'm going to let Shannon take the questions.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just, and if
Sure.
I still have time, I'll throw it back over to Jeremy. Given the conversations we're having about the requirements to reduce emissions and the competitiveness issues between the U.S. and Canada, I did just want to mention the importance of that discussion around investment versus production tax credits and the way that governments incent emissions reductions. Of course, in the U.S., they have a method that offers a guaranteed price for actual proven reduced emissions. And I think just for Canadians, for the committee members, it would behoove Canadian policymakers to look at that model versus Canada, where layers of different kinds of carbon taxes have simply served to increase the cost of living, make fuel and food unaffordable, and don't seem to have any relationship whatsoever to actual emissions reductions. So that'll be a topic that I hope this committee will be able to explore with American representatives and others as we go forward. I just did, though, want to ask a question about the SIF program. It seems I understand, of course, the importance of Canada owning the supply chain in critical mineral production, leading to electrification goals. That's a very high priority that Canadians should address. But I have a question about wood fiber LNG. That's a groundbreaking project. It will be net zero by 2030. It has an Indigenous partner as an environmental regulator. It will be run on renewable electricity by 2027. And the application was made into the Advanced Net Zero and Indigenous Reconciliation part of the fund. And just mind-bogglingly, it got rejected. Can someone explain why?
I think it would be important that we have a conversation with the company. It's important that we have a conversation to explain where the priorities are for the program and maybe speak to them about how decisions were made to issue that rejection letter.
That's the end of the 2.5 minutes. We'll go now over to Mr. Bruson, who will also have 2.5 minutes on the clock.
Thank you so much. My question's really about how Canada can seize the opportunities that are presented by what we see as a worldwide transition on low-carbon products. And I believe it was your statement, Monsieur Desrosiers, you mentioned that the EU is showing a preference for lower-emission products. And that they're prioritizing collaboration that drives energy transition and security. I'll maybe start with you, but if anyone else wants to jump in on that, what is the EU doing, and how do we make sure that we are seizing those opportunities as we go forward?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that the opportunities abound. I was with Ed Emissions just recently, and we heard from our ambassador in Japan, our ambassador in South Korea, our ambassador in the US, our ambassadors in Germany, in Spain, in France, all saying how keen those partners are to secure their supply from Canada and their firms. And this is one of those kind of rare moments where you have governments and firms alike very much converging because they know that their clients are expecting low carbon embedded. And when they do make those investment decisions on those $1 billion of assets, they're very, very diligent at looking at all stages, from transportation to production to transformation, as to how Canada stack up in this regard. And all in all, thanks to our clean electricity, thanks to many of the things that plays in our favor, we actually stack up quite well. And that's part of the reason why we have seen so many deals happening lately.
Can I just elaborate on one point? Another thing that the European Union is doing, of course, is standing up the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Measure. And Canada, as in so many areas, is well placed to address that because of our robust system of carbon pricing and regulations.
More seconds. On border carbon adjustments, if we do not do what we need to transition to a low carbon economy, what would be the impact of the EU border carbon adjustments on our trade with the EU?
Well, CBAM would impose effectively a tariff on any imported products that are not low carbon.
Thank you so much.
That's the end of that round. We'll go to Monsieur Simard, who will have 2.5 minutes on his clock.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Just to come back, because I like my friend Earl and Shannon as well, but I think a first principle when we're talking about energy transition, it's carbon, and there are not taxes on carbon which do not apply in Quebec because we have our own taxes on carbon, and there are also rules on fuels, and the Conservative government also put regulations on on gas and fuels, and I think I heard that with regard to clean hydrogen and the carbon load, and are there any scales or measures? The minister, we've heard they don't want to talk about different colors of hydrogen, blue, green, others. Do you have any types of scales or criteria for the evaluation of carbon emissions for various types of hydrogen? Yes, we have a scale. The cleanest is 40%, and then 25%, and 15%. I think that there's a level of carbon per kilogram, and I would have to check the exact figures, but there is a scale. There are 3 levels. Thank you. And for a project as a whole, and a hydrogen project is more expensive than hydrogen produced through hydroelectricity. And does this scale apply to all types of infrastructure that are needed for the production of hydrogen? I don't know if that's if it's necessarily more expensive for the facilities, yes, but for a project for green hydrogen, for example, there's a need for a significant investment in wind towers, and so then also the need to build a road network to access the facility, and there are other factors as well that affect the. Could you provide that information to the committee?
Angus will have his last 2.5 minutes in this round.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Green.
I'll take it. Thank you, Charlie. I'll start with something I think we can all agree with, which is that we need to go much faster in this energy transition, and we're going to need more investment to do that. Now, some facts. The oil and gas industry last year, the 5 largest companies alone, their profits were $38 billion. The price at the pump for Canadians across the country, the carbon tax went up 2 cents last year. Their profits went up 18 cents. And so we know this government has already put in place a windfall tax on excess profits. They called it the Canada Recovery Dividend. They did that for banks and insurance companies. The PBO has costed it out. we could raise $4.4 billion to reinvest in proven climate solutions. And so I think I'd like to turn to Mr. Jovanovic for your reflections on what could be done if we were to use that $4.4 billion and invest that in proven climate solutions, whether that's retrofitting homes, transit. Can you reflect on how much quicker we could go if we had a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies in this country?
Thank you for your question. I'm not in a position to talk about or speculate on whether we on the considerations around introducing a windfall tax on.
Sure, I'm not looking for
gas,
that.
but,
What I'm
yeah.
putting forward is the PBO has told us that political decision would raise $4.4 billion. And so I'm wondering if others from the finance department could share what 4.4, if you had another 4.4 billion, where would you invest it to get the lowest cost emission reductions right now?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that question. It's we've made substantial, the government has made substantial investment in, as I said, like just looking at the 5 various ITCs covering different aspects of clean technology, but I'm going to turn to you.
Maybe just to mention that the Canada Growth Fund is on the cusp of announcing some deals, and it is that arm's length institution whose job is to do exactly that, to work with the market to find the most cost-effective ways to reduce emissions in the country with the private sector. So they are doing that.
That's the end of our time. So I'd like to thank all of our witnesses today for coming in and spending the time with us. We are going to now suspend from this part of the meeting to move in camera. So we'll ask anybody who's not going to be in the in-camera portion of the meeting to bid your adieus, gather your papers, and to make your exit so we can conclude our committee business shortly. So we'll suspend for a few minutes here.